This would be a huge shift in Apple's strategy, long-time strategy for the production of its devices. What's your take?
It would be massive. And ultimately, we think best case 5 to 7% of production could go to potentially India over the next 12 to 18 months. But this would be a gargantuan type of shift for Apple. And that's why right now it just speaks to these headwinds and what we're seeing with U.S.-China, how much of an impact it's had, that they've actually had to think twice about betting the farm on China.
So talk to us about how Apple would do this. I mean, Foxconn has said it can move the production for U.S.-bound phones outside of China, but where does it go? Where can it go as fast as it needs to go, potentially?
Yeah, that's why realistically, I mean, they could paint a rosy picture, but their hands are tied at this point. Best case, like I said, 5 to 7% of production would move out really over the next 18 months to potentially India or Vietnam. But ultimately, I mean, Apple has made its bed in China. That's where the company's focused. Obviously, Foxconn, 1.4 million Chinese that they employ there. And it would really something that could disrupt the food chain, could disrupt the supply perspective, and also ultimately lead to more costs for Apple. So I think right now, this is a poker game that they're playing. And I continue to think that they are not going to move production out of China, but ultimately it really comes down to U.S.-China trade talks as they continue to be the poster child for that situation.
Now, our own Mark Gurman, who covers Apple for Bloomberg Technology, joining us now. Mark, what exactly do we know about what Apple asked its suppliers to do and whether or not the suppliers are actually going to do this?
According to a report in the Nikkei overseas, Apple asked for between 15 and 30% of production to be explored to be moved out of China. But I tend to agree with Dan here. He had a great analyst note, and as he was, saying to you in this conversation, it is a little bit of poker, right? Apple needs the help of some of these suppliers in order to work with China, the Chinese government, to work with the U.S. in order to get this thing resolved. My opinion personally is that if they are going to start shifting things out of China, it's going to be a very gradual process. This is not something that's going to take overnight. This is something that if Apple were to go full throttle on this could take 5 to 10 years. It would require building new facilities. I think just moving things from China to Vietnam and Malaysia and India and other countries, in Asia, that's more of a stopgap. If you're already going to move everything out of China, you might as well go all the way and move it to the U.S. See, because the manufacturing world is moving towards more automation. It's moving towards robotics. And Apple has the money to potentially put together this breakthrough facility like we've never seen before, where they can manufacture everything using robotics and very few human, very little human talent here locally in the States.
And yet, despite the fact that Apple is, one of the richest companies in the world, has a huge stockpile of cash, they've kept their production in China for a reason, and in part, I imagine that is because of cost. So could you see, despite the rise of automation, which will come, but it's going to take some time, Apple really moving its production to a more expensive place?
I think that the robotics aspect of it and automation will eventually solve that. For now, the technology to do that is not there yet. So going to other places in Asia, that will solve the cost problem. It won't be that much more expensive than it is in China. Of course, they're doing their checks here. They're balancing everything out. And they probably realize, like avoiding the tariffs, it will save them money in the long run if moving to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand, some of those other countries. But eventually, if they're going to revamp their entire supply chain, and to be honest, this is not an easy thing, right? They have this infrastructure for decades in China that could pop out, hundreds of millions of devices each year. They're not going to just throw that all away to move to Malaysia or Indonesia long term. There has to be a bigger play here. Apple has invented so many things. It's been the first technology giant to so many things. And my true feeling, and of course this is just opinion right now, if they're going to really do this, they're going to do it big, and it's going to take a long time.
Now, Dan, we don't know what the result of this trade war is going to be. It is hard to imagine the U.S. and China going back to the way it was. So no matter what the outcome is, do you think Apple should still diversify anyway, should move its production out of China, whether that's to Southeast Asia or to the United States? no matter what happens.
Look, as Mark talked about, I mean, it all comes down to what's going to happen with the $325 billion. If that tariff threat ultimately is just talk and never happens, I really don't think anything really changes for Apple in China, because that would really be a strategic move. That would be a blunder if they moved out of China. As long as the trade deal gets done, there's no more tariffs. Because ultimately, it would be major disruption and ultimately then cause more problems than success if they ultimately did that. The only way they do that and are forced to do it is if a trade situation continues to spiral more negative. And just like I think, best case, 5 to 7% in the next 18 months. And that's why right now, Apple, its hands tied, and that's why there's a poker game, and Cook is essentially a pseudo ambassador between U.S. and China.